The On Target Institute presents a teaching from the Men on Target small group curriculum. Now with today's session, On Target founder Vince D'Acchioli.
Men, how you doing? So good to be with you again, and welcome to our Men on Target Module 3 Session 19. In our last couple of sessions, we've been dealing with the question, how am I wired uniquely? I hope you really appreciated the information we shared there. But in the next couple of sessions, we're going to be talking about the next question, why am I here? In this session, we're dealing with Why Am I Here, Part 1. A reminder, if you do not have handouts for these sessions, you can find them and download them at our website at www.otm.co. Okay, here we go. Session 19, Part 1, Why Am I Here? Let's briefly revisit the three unalterable facts we've been talking about. Fact number 1 is that God knows you and has created you for a special purpose. Fact number 2 is He's given us special gifts toward the satisfaction of that purpose. We've kind of been going there in these weeks ahead of us, or behind us, I should say. And then fact number 3 is that God simply wants us to discover what that purpose for our life is. Pascal says this, all men seek happiness. This is without exception. This is the motive of every action of every man, even those, he says, who hang themselves. We're looking for happiness. Viktor Frankl says this, man's search for meaning is the chief motivation of his life. I like to say that all of us are searching for meaning. All of us want success, but oftentimes we have what I call dysfunctional notions of success. My friend Pat Morley, who has really done a lot to contribute to this session, which I'll share in a moment, says it this way, failure can also happen when we succeed in ways that don't really matter. Reminds me of the old Charlie Brown cartoon where he goes out, and shoots a bunch of arrows out into his back fence, and then he goes out and he draws targets around all of them, to try to make it successful. And that's, I think, sometimes what we do in our life. But listen, guys, men are born. We're born with a sense of destiny and with a sense of purpose. A man's greatest need is for significance. However, we pursue this need in very, very different ways. Look, the world, this is the world's way of pursuing some of this stuff. The world says, beauty is important. It's very important that we look a particular way, and we're buying into the lie that's being fed us through magazines, especially young girls who are looking at these magazines with these ideas of what beauty is supposed to be, and many of them are dysfunctional. Many of them aren't, that's not even their real body parts. And we're trying to live up to these unrealistic expectations in the area of how we look. Or we get significance out of brains. If I just have the right degree, if I just have the right information, somehow that'll make me significance. Or perhaps with you, it's bucks. I got enough money where people are going to look at me and say, wow, that guy's really successful. So we look for it in bucks and sometimes in brawn. Beauty, brains, bucks, and brawn. Those are the 4 B words that unfortunately trap so many men into thinking that they're successful if they have these things. The other areas we look for significance in is whether we have the right acquaintances with people. I just know certain people, and that kind of moves me a different level. Or maybe it's places that I've been, or places that I own, or maybe it's stuff, it's things, it's the car I drive and all that. Guys, listen, these are lies. These are going to put us in a trap that it's going to be hard for us to get out of. What does Jesus say about that? He makes it pretty clear, guys. He says, apart from Him, we will never find significance. And John 15:5 is where we find this. This is a powerful, powerful verse. He says, I am the vine. You are the branches. We need to remember that, guys. He says, if a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. But apart from me, he says, listen, guys, you can't do very much. Now, we find significance by finding our purpose. Pat Morley, from Man in the Mirror, wrote something years ago that I think was very, very special. He said that when it comes to purpose, he calls them we have universal purposes. There are 4 of them. I'm going to unpack the 4 universal purposes in this session. And then in the next session, I'm going to talk more specifically about our personal calling and how to discover which direction God wants you to take. So, as we unpack the 4 universal purposes, I want to suggest to you that the first 2 are kind of task related, and you'll see as we unpack these, and the second 2 are more on the relational side. Let's get into them. The 4 universal purposes. Purpose number 1 is to build the kingdom. Probably the second one is to tend the culture. Let me just go through them and then I'll unpack them. And the third one is to love the king. And the fourth one is to love the king's people. These are the 4 universal purposes. Now let me go back and unpack them for you. To build the kingdom. This is called the Great Commission. Probably in the greatest speech ever given. Matthew 28:18-20. Then it says, Jesus came to them and he said this, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make what? Disciples. Guys, disciples of all nations. Listen, not converts to your theology or your way of thinking, but true disciples, true followers of Jesus. This is something we're all to be involved with. It's a universal purpose. He calls us to baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. This is a very, very important thing for us to get. If at some level we're not part of the Great Commission, guys, we're not going to ever hit on all cylinders. He goes on to say, teach them also to obey everything I've commanded you. This is pretty specific. And surely, he says, I am with you always to the very end of the age. I don't know about you, but that's an incredible promise. Okay, number 2, universal purpose, to tend the culture. We should be leading the charge when it comes to our environment and when it comes to our worlds. It's called a cultural commission. And God teaches us about that going all the way back into Genesis. In Genesis 1:28, he says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Guys, God's given us this commission that we are to take care of this beautiful planet, this earth that he has given us. Okay, number 3, to love the king. This is called the Great Commandment. The Great Commandment, one of the most important things that we can ever imagine or do. Matthew 22:36-38. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Come on, you guys know this verse. Jesus replied, listen, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Guys, I can't emphasize this enough for all of us. You know, our job is to really understand who this God is. We've been talking about that in this curriculum. Understand who he is, to really honor him, to obey him, and to really love him deeply. That's the first and most important, because without that, we can't really do much of anything else. We certainly can't do this last one, which is a call to love the king's people. Jesus does go on to say, love your neighbor as yourself, and we can't do it without loving God first. This, though, I call the new commandment. In John 13:34-35, it says this, a new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. It's very important that we get these universal purposes. Guys, we've got to be involved in these purposes in a universal way, really before we start getting specific about what God's called us into. And discovering your specific purpose is something that we're going to talk about next week. Now, what's the life implication of what we've been sharing? It's simply this: not being involved in God's universal purposes will hinder my pursuit of significance. Let me repeat that. Not being involved in some way in these universal purposes will hinder my pursuit of significance. What about life application? Well, here's where we can drill down now with our discussion questions and go back to these universal purposes and talk about where we are. How would you or I rate my engagement in the 4 universal purposes? Purpose number 1, to build the kingdom. How would I rate in the area of building the kingdom? Am I actively involved with expanding God's kingdom? Am I witnessing to other people? Am I, through my church or through some other mechanism, getting involved with outreach or missions or those kinds of things? Where would you rate yourself? Maybe you could do it on a scale of 1 to 5 or something, and then talk about it. Maybe even talk about some ways that you can get more engaged. Number 2, how do I do in the area of tending the culture? Am I even interested in the culture? Am I concerned enough to really get involved maybe in volunteering in ways that help to make sure that I'm taking care of this planet? Maybe it's in the things that you do, it's in the waste you produce, in all kinds of areas. But talk about that. How do you feel about your responsibility for tending the culture? And number 3, this is a huge one, guys. In the area of loving the King, do you really love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind? Do you really love Him deeply? If not, why not? What are the things that maybe you need to do to re-engage, to really love the Lord at a much, much deeper level? And the guys in this discussion with you around your tables will help you with that, because we've all been at different stages of loving the King in our life. And it's very important that you be honest with the men in your group, or even honest with yourself if you're just watching this alone. Where is your love for the King? And then the last one is to love the King's people. How are you doing in terms of loving people? Listen, someone once said, we are called to love everyone. That doesn't mean we have to like everyone. There's a difference there. Liking someone and loving someone are at 2 different levels, but we are called to love the King's people, to love everybody. And listen, guys, this is a very, very important thing. Are you able to see others through Jesus' eyes? You can't do that unless you're really in love with the King. Now, I pray God blesses you in your discussion time, and really go ahead and drill down on these things. And until next time, don't forget about it.